It's been a pleasure hearing everyone this morning. Uh, Late one evening, my older son came clutching a hardcover Calvin and Hobbes. And with a twinkle in his eye, I could sense that, a good joke, just like juicy gossip, one cannot keep to oneself, has to be shared immediately with the right people. So he points to the monochromatic cartoon strip where Calvin very philosophically puts in a question. Why does mother pack us off to school every day? And doesn't fail to add in the same tone, and so is father packed off to work every day. Well, expectedly the answer comes from Hobbes, saying, mother wants to drive all trouble out of house every day. So that, you see, are the two children that we have, Calvin and Hobbes. And I'm a lawyer as well, and we are modern day gladiators trying to go and fight other people's battles. So it's very common for somebody in the family would say in the morning when we are dressed up within uniforms like school children, all the best. There's a battle to be won. You're going off to battleground. So one day he doesn't find me in the court dress, and again the older one asks the pertinent question, where are you heading after today? So I said, today I'm going to deliver a lecture. So he says, okay, all right, then all the best for your lecture. Pat, came the reply, or like an afterthought, by the poker-faced younger one, the Hobbes in the family. Bhai, today he doesn't need the best wishes. It's the people who are going to listen to him who need the best wishes. So that's the kind of treatment I get. Indeed, most of us, at least the adults, have had a deep a moment of relief when the children are packed off on a bus to school every day, or some relative kindly consents to take care of them in a holiday. Trouble for us is out there. Well, schools have taken over the space of modern day child monitoring mechanism. And therefore, and this is a change from our joint family mechanism, and therefore it's not too late in the day to ask ourselves the question, what is the education being supplied to our children? And also a point of introspection for institutions as what they are giving in. Modern day education, as always, has been favored to instill learning. Whether experience and experiments with schooling, institutions, and other education mechanism has shown us that broadly we have a fixed menu of curriculum which is being dished out. You've got the standard 2 staple languages, some introductory math, some basic science, social sciences. And like a fixed lunch menu, we have a number of forgettable side dishes, which may not be fresh, like dance, music, craft, sport, physical education, and a whole host of activities. But I think all of us at some point realize that none of them have been undertaken to provide a certain level of expertise or proficiency in those areas. We really don't expect that schools or all of us would encourage them to take it up as a profession or take it as a life mission. Well, that's a question to ponder over. When your child shows some genius at math or physics, your face lights up with a smile. There's a future engineer, scientist, researcher. But how many of us have had that same excitement when the child shows promise in sport? Possibly because we do not have an evaluation mechanism for these side dishes. Thank God we do not have an evaluation mechanism for that. But one of the side effects is that since you do not have an evaluation mechanism, all of us and the children miss out on some very important things that they could have learned or encountered in life. We very early on decide what is relevant and what is not relevant. We compartmentalize things between relevant and irrelevant and make a curriculum out of it. Therefore, our education system looks to be a little boring. Well, the age-old question, education for employment, earning livelihood, or for learning? Because all of us expect the result of a subject being taught to gain immediate employment. Well, that brings to the other question that I wanted to raise before I go on. Was the correlation between the relevant and the non-relevant, and two seemingly completely different things. Early in the day, we heard the talk of Ms. Parekh. She embodied that two things can be brought together. Now, studies have shown that things like math and music are highly correlated. So a child, when she's learning piano or playing a piano, using both hands, legs, all senses, is possibly more adept at learning math and vice versa. And we've seen that in sport as well. How many of us have felt the joy when we saw a perfect cover drive or a blistering straight drive by a top cricketer like a Tendulkar or Gavaskar? But have you ever realized that in that straight drive or a cover drive, there is a lot of physics in it? All of us, or a lot of us, have been mesmerized with that elegant, single-handed, on-the-run backhand winner by Roger Federer. We applauded of him. We gloated over his shot. But how many of us thought and saw it as having a lot of physics and mechanics in it? Well, that unfortunately has been missing from our entrance exams as well. Let's take an example for law entrance test. That's my background. When you give a CLAT, you are tested on math, English, general knowledge, legal reasoning, logical sense, and a little other things. What are we missing there? What about leadership qualities, management skills, emotional quotient? As a lawyer, I can say for myself and for others that these qualities, if not more, are equally important for making of a well-rounded, good lawyer. Hopefully, our entrance test will try and build in some of things for tomorrow. The point I'm trying to underline is that when your child or when your colleague picks up a pastime, fiddles with a toolbox, encourage him, let him be. If he has been able to create a parallel world where he can be lost in it, please let that happiness bloom. As an advocate, and also very importantly, a person or generation between a father and a son who missed out on considerable school before their teenage years due to illnesses, and thank God they fought successfully with illnesses which were considered terminal, we saw that that loss did not get them to lose out anything in life. In fact, they were possibly better equipped to handle life than their peers. Not to speak that they were not lagging behind academically, possibly were a step ahead. That got us thinking on the educational apartheid and led us to experiment. The first experiment that we undertook was setting up a not-for-profit tennis academy 10 years ago, which at any given point of time coaches a little under 100 kids. And I'm all the time asked this question: have you produced champions? Are we proud of those champions? Yes, of course we produce some champions, we are proud of them. But with that question and answer, the larger story goes untold and unrelated. When a child comes in and learns to play, he learns to play a game. He learns to lose. He learns to win a match and play harder. He learns and experiences the pain of building a muscle in the body, and then discovers the joy and importance of that muscle, a strong muscle in his body. But what's the point of all of this? Does it help? Our experience has been that a child who has learned to lose, who's learned to play an opponent without the feeling of an enmity, who's learned to play in tandem with another player while playing doubles, is far better equipped to handle the uncertainties of the world. Trust me, serving for a day in the sweltering heat of Jodhpur at 44 degrees Celsius as a ball picker to your fellow players while they're playing their match is a much bigger lesson in humility than any classroom can teach. So sport, like a whole host of other things, if played for the pleasure of it, it can inculcate a whole lot of characteristic strengths in you and teach you life lessons. A few years ago, possibly most of us, if not all, saw the movie Slumdog Millionaire, based on a novel written by an Indian bureaucrat and brought the Indian scenario to Hollywood after a long gap and underlined the old adage, you never know what will come handy when. So that was a story of a young boy who was raised in slums of India, who through his growing up freely with no pressures on him, gathers snippets of information and then goes on to win the most coveted quiz contest on television and consequently a whole lot of money. What it awakened us was to a modern day fable that if the best thing that you can do for your child is to let him free and loose. And that brings me to where I started off, the correlation between the relevant and the irrelevant. If you recall the movie, the snippets of information was considered absolutely irrelevant when he was growing up, but that's what helped him win. When we grow old, a lot of, especially the commerce students, are told that you read management books, even things like how to become rich, because they're considered relevant. But how many of us consider the stories of Vijayadan Detha very relevant in our modern day curriculum? Detha, if I may point out, has been one of the keenest voices of this region and Marwari literature over the last century. A lot of people would consider him great literature and possibly to an extent a social comment. But again, I think we're missing the larger story. How many of us consider those stories as an equally important tool, possibly if not the best, to teach some of those relevant subjects? If you read stories of Detha, you would realize they would be a supremely effective tool for teaching things like social sciences, history and oral traditions, the contemporary social and legal structure of those societies, feminism and gender equality, and a whole host of things. But we fail to see that. It's ironical and slightly unimaginative of me to now say so, but Jodhpur, being the hub and the most important center of the handicraft and furniture industry in this country possibly, does not get its institution to introduce even preliminary introductory carpentry in their school curriculums. You cannot be devoid of your immediate ecosystem and the society that you grew up in. A common curriculum as a standard set menu is possibly taking us to a desired direction which may not be great for all of us. That brings me to another of my experiments that we ended up doing much later after the tennis academy. The Desert Leaf Foundation, the three of us, went up to set up Kitabo, the Children's Literature Festival for Jodhpur. And in 2017, December, when we did its second edition, we ended up being India's largest children's literature festival. And when I say largest, it's in a measure of more than 250 sessions, spread over 3 days, over 15 platforms, with over 10,000 children coming in with a number of adults in tow. But that, again, is not the larger story. There is theater, music, literature, storytelling, author speaking, workshops, creative writing, and a whole host of things that's there. But the question that I got asked, and I'm glad that question was asked to me as a founder, was, what is a cookery session doing in a literature festival? Thankfully, we got to bring out, that was a session there. Thankfully, it got us to bring out the philosophy that with which we set it up. Literature, we normally see it as something to be read, to do with languages, derive pleasure out of it, and communicate. We thought, let's bring literature out of the classrooms and into the lives of children. And while doing so, expand the definition of literature itself. For us, any form of communication that is beautifully or aesthetically done is literature. Cookery, back to that question. Well, a whole lot of us, especially in India, communicate with a whole lot of other people, especially mothers and homemakers, on food. And if we can learn food and cooking a little better, we will not just be able to communicate better with them, but also respect the effort that goes into cooking food for us. So while a person like me who takes a session there on law through stories for children, we think it's equally important that you must have stories for children through food. That's been the sum and substance of what we have been trying to achieve. How many of us have thought over getting a cross-border specialization? We only think unidimensionally. Thankfully, today we are all waking up to the ideas of letting our children free and work towards it. If we are to reinvent and reinvest the trust and faith which ought to have been the repository of the educational institutions, we must go back to learning life skills and bring into the system some of those irrelevant subjects. For the eureka moment invariably comes to you sitting in a bathtub or sitting under an apple tree. For the creative juices to flow freely, it's important that they're not circumscribed by any assumptions or ambitions. So, all of us, let's come together, listen to some pointless stories, myths and mythologies. Let's run and play. Leave the door open for the moments of happiness to come in. Let's celebrate irrelevant and pointless stories in our life.
Thank you, Dr. Balia. Very well said.